Hi there, my name is Laurie Bell. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author, and I'm joining the Australian Book Lovers special sci-fi panel to talk all things Australian science fiction. You can find my science fiction space opera action-adventure White Fire and a collection of sci-fi short stories, The Good, the Bad and the Undecided, on the Australian Book Lovers sci-fi page. You can find The Butterfly Stone and The Tiger's Eye listed on the Australian Book Lovers fantasy page. Buckle in, space lovers, it's going to be a blast.
Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
A big warm welcome to everyone and a huge thank you for joining us for the Australian Book Lovers podcast. Our mission is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature that spans a whole range of genres to book lovers around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to write their next bestseller. I'm Veronica Strachan, aka V.E. Patton, fantasy, memoir and picture book writer, reader, one of your co-founders and hosts for the podcast, coming to you today from Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung country, for this episode number 57.
And I am Darren Kazenko, dystopian science fiction and horror author, book lover, of course, and avid reader, one of your hosts, co-hosts and co-founders, should I say, of the Australian Book Lovers podcast, coming to you today from a somewhat rainy Kaurna country for what is, I hope, a spectacular and magical episode number 57.
Tell us about what the magic is behind the number 57, Darren.
Well, that would be me. No, sorry, that's not what my notes say. No, it's we're just getting closer to that magic 100, aren't we?
Yeah.
I just love it. And, just always, every episode's an opportunity to either, have a listen to a great interview, or in this case of my luckiness over the last couple of shows, to actually interview authors. And it's just been fabulous. Today's guest is amazing as well, who we will discuss very shortly. But yes, is there any possible, shall we say, magic power or, surreal essence to the number 57? Well, I believe it is symbolic of the fact that one is doing his, her or they best in life, even though things aren't going according to that person's will. Or, so soon apparently the life will be changed in the most drastic way possible, but remember that changes aren't always bad. So the concept here is to look at the positive side and keep hoping for the best. And the number 57 is also a sign of a major evolution. So now, once it shows up in your life, it indicates that, well, perhaps some things are meant to be altered from time to time to make place for newer ones. So if we don't like change, that's okay, but we are expected to never hinder the path of progress when it comes through these changes. So I'm still forever perplexed how the number 57 can apply to how am I a 57er? I'm not 57 years of age, but for the moment in time, I think we are, just because it is awesomely podcast episode number 57.
It is. And in fact, 57 Heinz varieties was something that when I was a kid, that was always, quoted at me. Or they'd call a dog or a cat who was just a bit of this or a bit of that, a Heinz variety, because actually there is still Heinz around. I'm not sure who it's owned by now, but Heinz varieties were all the canned soups and spaghettis and those kind of things. And so
don't forget baked beans.
They had 57 Heinz varieties. That was the thing. So even in bingo, if you say number 57, they would call it, Heinz variety, and people knew it was 57. So there you go.
I can't imagine 57. I'm not a connoisseur of Heinz, but I do love baked beans once in a very blue moon. And I always thought there was tomato sauce and ham sauce. Sorry, there is a barbecue as well. So that's the three Heinz I might be able to quote.
There you go. I don't know if they actually had 57 varieties, but that was just the number. So
that's
if anybody wants to let me know.
Beans.
Yes, if anybody knows the truth behind that urban legend, please let me know. You'd have to possibly be as old as me, but anyway, there you go.
Well, look, when we look back a little bit in time, so I've got a few nice little events that happened in 1957 in Australia.
Bring it on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Now, on the 15th of September in 1957, apparently Hobart had its wettest day on record with 156.2 millimetres, was a result of a slow-moving low-pressure system redeveloping over the Tasman Sea. That's a lot of rain for an island out there. I can imagine it may be on the equator somewhere, but not down. I hope it hasn't exceeded that measurement since, and hope that's up-to-date information. But either way, it would have been quite a spectacle. Now, we also have on the 3rd of October, the Australian National Airways, ANA, merged with Ansett to form Ansett ANA. So I can remember Ansett when I was a kid, but that was in the days when an interstate flight was...
it's a big thing.
That was 2 years in advance to save and prepare. Now, Slim Dusty, who we all love, of course, he won his first gold record in 1957 for a pub with no beer. So that's
there
pretty
you
cool.
go.
Of course, I do not live in New South Wales, so please forgive me if I mispronounce this person's name. But in 1957, architect Jorn Utzon wins the design competition for the Sydney Opera House.
Yes.
There we go. So very iconic time in history there, recognising it for it is a very splendid building, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, Robbery Under Arms is released as a film adaptation. And so now it's actually a British movie, so in 1957, but it was an adaptation of the novel of the same name, which was written in 1888 by Thomas Alexander Brown, who actually he wrote under the pseudonym Rolf Boulderwood. Funny enough, in 1985 they redid Robbery Under Arms, and directed by Don Crombie, who actually went to school with his son. So that was an interesting little, 7 degrees of separation. So now Voss by author Patrick White won the inaugural Miles Franklin Literary Award. And here's something a little bit close to home for you, Veronica. On the 19th of January, GTV9 television station is officially opened in Melbourne.
There you go.
And Pick a Box TV series.
Yes.
Was first broadcast as radio
Bob
program.
and Dolly Dyer.
Now, is that the one that Bert Newton used to host as well?
No, before him. Did Bert ever do Pick a Box? I don't know, but it was pretty old.
I remember, the series went from 1957 to 1971, so it was
possibly
finished before I was even born. But I do remember that show where you had to pick a box. Because as a kid, it was always, when it's finished, it was like a Ford Australia, we're moving with you. That was like their tagline. Why I remember that, I have no idea. So if anyone can remember the name of that show, please let us know. But on a final frontier of Australia, always leading the world with inventions, in 1957, an Australian scientist, Dr. Arthur Farnworth of the CSIRO, he invented a way to process wool clothing with a permanent crease.
Wow.
So it was called Zero-Set, the process for producing permanently creased fabric. So how's that? That's pretty crazy that comes from Australia. Back in 1957, because I think that has quite a few implications for the fashion industry all around the world. All around the world.
It sounds like a pretty busy year.
I think it was, yeah. I can only go by my research because having not been there, but I love the idea that we've done. Clothing seems to be a bit of a theme for Australia. We invented the Hills Hoist, and then the permanent crease. There you go. We are world leaders. So it's a little bit of a snapshot in time of Australia 1957. It is episode 57. So having reminisced a little bit, and while I'm still a little bit confused in my head, I'm trying to imagine 57 cans of baked bean flavours on the shelf. Shall we jump to some news?
Okay, bring on the news. A little bit of award news for you for this episode. We have recently had the Aurealis Awards. There's a lot of sci-fi going around in my brain at the moment, but not to worry. So this, of course, is even though they're held in 2022, they are the 2021 Aurealis Awards because the books need to have been, written and published last year. So the management team are, in fact, the Canberra Speculative Fiction Guild, and they wanted to congratulate all the winners. And we also, at Australian Book Lovers, want to congratulate the winners for a brilliant set of books, which now I have to go on, most of them will have to go on my list again to read for the, want to read. So here we go. These are, of course, the Aurealis Awards are Australia's premier speculative fiction award each year. And they were held in person in Canberra this year. So I saw little bits and pieces on social media of people, flying, driving up to be at the awards. So best children's fiction, the book was Dragonskin by Karen Foxley from Allen and Unwin. The best graphic novel illustrated work was The Curiosities, Zana Fralin and Phil Lesney, the illustrator from Hachette, Australia. The best young adult short story, Don't Look by Lisa Fuller, Hometown Haunts, Love Oz YA Horror Tales, Wakefield Press. The best horror short story, this is one for you, also Don't Look by Lisa Fuller, that same story as well. The best horror novella, now you'll be able to help me with the pronunciation of this. So All the Long Way Down by Alf Simpson. Now, in brackets, it's from Cthulhu Deep Down Under, Volume 3. So, that Cthulhu.
Yeah, Cthulhu. Yeah.
Cthulhu? That was right?
Cthulhu, yeah, that's H.P. Lovecraft's mythology.
There you go. All right, so there, I knew that you'd be able to tell me that one.
That's an interesting subgenre in the horror. You have the stories of H.P. Lovecraft, the short stories, should I say, of H.P. Lovecraft, and they're very unsettling and can really invoke some wonderfully dark and disturbing imagery. But it's just interesting that a lot of people take that world that's been built through his short stories and they expand on it. And it's just, I think it's a subgenre on its own. But so there you go. Cool.
There you go. Best fantasy short story. I love the name of this one. So-Called Bin Chicken by E.J. Delaney in Curious, a magazine, number 2.
That's an interesting title.
It is, yeah. So the poor old sacred ibis who gets called a bin chicken here in Australia. Anyway, we're moving on.
I don't get it. They're such cool birds. And when I was living, people, in Queensland, bin chickens, I think they're so cool. They look so funny. They're always
lovely
laughing.
Birds. Yeah, I think it's a bit mean. All right, the best fantasy novella is Bones of the Sea by Amy Lawrence from
that title.
Ink Print Press, and I've seen the cover of that. That's really good. Best science fiction short story is Relic, in brackets noun, a widow, a thing remaining from the past by Alison Goodman in the novel, in the anthology Relics, Wrecks and Ruins by CAT Press, CAT Press. And that was one that Aki Flinthart, we've talked about her a number of times, a brilliant author from Queensland who sadly is no longer with us. And that was one of the last things that I think she put together was the Relics, Wrecks and Ruins anthology she was involved in. Best science fiction novella, Preserved in Amber by Samantha Murray in Clark's World, number 178. You'll like this one too. Best collection, The Gulp by Alan Baxter, self-published.
There he is.
Yes, which you can find on the Australian Book Lovers website. The best anthology, and here we go, Relics, Wrecks and Ruins by Aki Flinthart was the editor. Lauren Elise Daniels and Genevieve, Genevieve, looks like they might have missed a bit. Anyway, Genevieve Flynn were the assistant editors at CAT Press. The best young adult novel, Waking Romeo by Catherine Barker, Allen and Unwin. The best horror novel, Holly and the Nobodies by Ben Pienaar, Hellbound Books. That's a good one, which is
company,
American.
Hellbound Books.
Sorry, what was that?
I said that's a good name for a horror company, Hellbound Books, because Hellbound being from the Hellraisers.
There you go.
By Clive Barker, yeah.
Very good. Now, the best fantasy novel is Dark Rise by C.S. Pacat, Allen and Unwin. The best science fiction novel, Waking Romeo by Catherine Barker, Allen and Unwin. And the Sarah Douglas Book Series Award. And I just love this award because I do love Sarah Douglas's stories. They're just fantastic. And I might have talked about this before. So Sarah was an ex-nurse. She worked in theatres, anaesthetics. She lived just up the road from me, then went down to live in Tassie. So I felt like we had a lot in common. And coming to writing late, she has also passed and left this award for series. So it's Blood and Gold, The Crown of Rowan in Novella 2014, Daughters of the Storm 2014, Sisters of the Fire 2016, Queens of the Sea 2019, all of them written by Kim Wilkins from HarperCollins. Now, I've only read Daughters of the Storm, so I've obviously got to get busy and read the other two.
Well, it sounds like you definitely have a lot of reading.
I do. And there's one more that I want to share, which is the Conveners Award for Excellence, and that is Dangerous Visions and New Worlds, Radical Science Fiction, 1950 to 1985, by Andrew Nettie and Ian McIntyre, the editors, and PM Press, which kind of is a nice segue, or it will be a nice segue when we talk about your interview. I was going to say victim. That's not fair. When we talk about your interview customer that you had, one of our fabulous authors that you chatted with today, and the things that kind of prompted us to think about where we went today.
Well, I like to think of the fabulous authors that take the time to chat with me as wonderfully honoured guests, but victims could also be a term we could throw in, most definitely.
All right. So anyway, that's the Aurealis Awards, for which I was very excited, and they will be going on the list, many of them. Now, Australian words and idioms for today, and I did think about switching to A for Aurealis, but I thought, no, let's keep going. Let's go with R. So we are up to R, or down to R, seeing as we're going backwards. Have you heard of the word razoo?
I can confidently reply with a single word, no.
Excellent. I love it when you haven't heard of it.
I definitely haven't heard of that.
Okay. The razoo, R-A-Z-O-O, is a non-existent coin of trivial value. So the razoo was first recorded in 1919, and it's used in negative context only, especially as to not have a brass razoo. It means you've got nothing, you're penniless. Now, the origin of the word is unknown, although it's perhaps a corruption of the French coin called a sou. The form brass razoo appears later in 1927 as well. The brass of brass razoo is likely influenced by the standard English brass farthing, which is also used in negative context with a similar meaning. She hasn't got a brass farthing. For an earlier discussion of the possibility that the form brass razoo is a euphemism for arse razoo, from arse raspberry a fart, see the article Brass Razoo, Is It But a Breath of Wind, on page 6 of their newsletter. And I haven't had a look at that, but I will have a little giggle to myself. So there you go.
Oh, well, see, I shouldn't have jumped in and said I'm confident to say the word no, because I think it was because of the razoo. But when I think about it, I think growing up, one of the terms that is now coming to the surface is stick it up your razoo or shove it up your razoo. I think
it's coming back to you when we went to toilet.
Slowly,
interesting.
Yes. See, these are the areas of the brain you need to ignite, and suddenly I can remember everything. No.
So there you go. Look, in 1965, here's a little quote for you: "Conquest horses in kitchen. My main worry was that when I did leave hospital, I wouldn't have a razoo to my name." And still in 2015, the Daily Telegraph in Sydney, "I am trapped in limbo and have not earned a brass razoo in 6 months." So yeah, people are still quoting it. So there you go. That's a razoo, just in case you weren't sure. Now, the other one I'm going to discuss today, because I think it's kind of relevant, and then we'll look to try and put politics behind us a little bit. But you will, of course, have heard of rort.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So a rort, for anyone who's not quite sure or who thinks, how do the Australians use it? Well, it is in fact to scam, misuse or to treat fraudulently. This significant Australian word derives from rort, which is W-R-O-U-G-H-T, an archaic past participle of the verb to work. So wrought with the W means worked into shape or condition. And we see it today in the term wrought iron, which indeed is a particularly wonderful thing that I enjoy. Indeed, the Australian wrought is sometimes spelled with the W-R-O-U-G-H-T rather than the R-O-R-T in early evidence. And there's wrought, the verb wrought first appears in 1919. So there you go. Now, wrought is also used as a noun, meaning a trick, a fraud, a dishonest practice, and is first recorded in 1926. For example, here's one from 1936. The cockies are supposed to pay this retention money into the bank, and we are supposed to draw interest on it, but normally they don't pay it in. They keep the use of it through the season, and we draw the bare amount at the end of the cut. It's the greatest wrought ever. And so there, when it comes in terms of politics, there's 2000, Canberra, the public service capital of Australia, is without doubt the wrought capital as well. And I don't think that's the public service people necessarily. I think there's a fair bit of the politics that goes on there.
Well, I think a simple explanation of the word wrought would be, for example, if I go if my friend owns a convenience store, shall we say, and I have the, a corporate credit card, and I say, how much are those chippies? Oh, they are $3. How about I give you $30 for them? It makes total sense, doesn't it?
It does. It does indeed. And so
$27 we have to share when he closes and we meet at the bar later. Now, I'm not saying that happens in, like, for example, real estate. No one would pay $30 million for a $3 million valuation property. That wouldn't happen. Oh, hang on. I better backtrack. That did.
What are you thinking, Darren? All right. So, did you hear I just said all right? Because that leads into the final R that I'm going to share with you, which is a particularly Australian idiom. And this is for all of those non-Australian people who are listening. As Australians say to you, you're right. It's often heard as a question from a salesperson to a customer. So this is the Australian equivalent of the standard query, are you being served? It may sound offhand to non-Australian ears, but although it's informal, it's not a sign of disrespect. It's a shortened form of are you all right? First recorded in 1974, apparently. So I would have thought it was a bit earlier, but no. Lost in thought, the sales girl crept up from him behind and whined, you right? So there you go. And then at the age, somebody complained, when sales assistants ask you, are you right? I have answered, no, I'm left of centre. What's wrong with, may I help you? So some people get a bit narky about it, but there you go.
Well, it's funny to say some people get a bit narky because I would never have thought, even though that is quite still today common, you know, someone will go, you right there? When you're shopping, which is why I like to wear headphones in shops because then they don't ask me. I may not be listening to anything, but it's a fantastic way of browsing. But it's also, it can also, if you hear someone saying, you right, mate, it's also could be the beginning of a good old-fashioned a fight.
You're right there. Yeah, depending on the intonation and the inclination of the head and the fist. Yes,
it's the context of the moment. So, you know, someone has an accent and go, oh, you right there, mate? Yeah. Or if someone does something in traffic a bit rude, be like, you right, mate?
Yeah, that's right. There's kind of that disbelief in your voice.
That usually means it's a punch-on. But, so from
particularly
retail
Australian
to
idiom.
The emergency room, you're right, can cover a whole spectrum.
There you go.
Cool word.
That is my news for the day. Although this is not news necessarily as information and education. What have you got for the listeners today, Darren?
Those definitions and idioms are awesome because it brings us closer relationship-wise to our language, or our Australian spin on the language. But for news today, I'd love to spotlight a couple of books, of course, in new editions.
Okay.
So starting with a fantastic Adelaide author who I had the absolute pleasure of talking to just a couple of days ago. The author is Andrew Roth of the outstanding city called Adelaide, and now he's a brand new collection of short stories called The Teeth of a Slow Machine.
I love that title.
Yeah, absolutely. Has just been released, so really looking forward to having him on the show. He'll be on episode 58, of course. But having that, it's just been released. If, shall we say, I'm about halfway through the book, and it's, shall I say, a beautifully unsettling and thought-inspiring collection of just supremely written stories, that's for sure. Andrew is a fantastic author. But The Teeth of a Slow Machine is this daring, irreverent short story collection dissects and explores the conundrums of contemporary life and what it is to be human through a world very like our own. So a corporate satire follows a pair of dark operatives working for a chicken franchise as they take careful revenge on counterfeiters. A coder calculates the odds of her husband's cold developing complications and killing him in a story told in code. A relationship at breaking point is told via a scrambled timeline of events that works like a puzzle. A man spends his inheritance on technology that will allow him to fly. And an archaeologist working for mining companies against the interests of Indigenous communities develops a mysterious psychological condition that causes her to black out and commit extreme acts of generosity. So to quote Josephine Rowe, one of the someone who has already reviewed this book, should I say, the review is at turns dreamlike, luminously satirical, fever-pitched and achingly mortal. The scope of Andrew Roth's debut collection is utterly refreshing and a joy to linger in. So there we
Excellent.
go, Teeth of a Slow Machine.
And not only that, but I have a copy of The Teeth of a Slow Machine to give away to our newsletter subscribers. So if you are listening to the podcast and you haven't yet subscribed to the newsletter, jump on the website on the page that says Book Lovers and get your name and email on there. And there's still time for you to go into the draw because I haven't finished writing the newsletter yet. So get on.
There you go. Well, and you definitely want to get a copy of this book. It is,
Yes.
it is fantastic.
Yes,
and I
indeed.
mean, I wouldn't. It's definitely not horror anyway. I wouldn't want to be brave enough to, dedicate a genre title to it. But it's definitely a contemporary collection that has. I don't know. There's something underlying it that I think will reach out and touch everybody in a different way. That's what I think. So
He's a great storyteller, Andrew.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he's from Adelaide, so I guess that's
Don't go on.
So, well, actually, oddly enough, there's another South Australian author I want to spotlight, which is pure coincidence. And the author's name is Judith C. Deene-Freeman. And Judith has listed 2 books on our website. And so the first one is a very new one that she's just popped on, and it's called The Lost Girl. So it's a Woolshed Bay story. So The Lost Girl is twin babies separated at birth who grow up on opposite sides of the country are unaware of the other's existence until one of them, Jo, goes searching for answers. A divorced academic and parent of a feisty teenage daughter, Jo discovers at his father's funeral the reason behind his miserable, unloving childhood when a family secret is revealed. He sets out on a journey to discover his true identity, and along the way he comes to a better understanding of himself. Jo's long-lost twin, Pammy, has had a happy childhood in Bethesda, a closed religious community in rural South Australia. But, like Jo, is confronted by startling news about her identity. Jo's search takes him from Melbourne to the outback and to Lismore, New South Wales, before finally arriving at Bethesda. Constrained by obligations to his newly found sister and his needy daughter, Jo is conflicted by his feelings. As he unravels the mystery surrounding his birth and the separation of the twins, Jo makes peace with himself. But can he find a way to unite all the threads of his life to find true happiness? Finding each other is as liberating for Jo and Pammy as it is for the people they love. Cheese making, troublesome teenagers, dick pics and cult life combined with midwives, family life, love and belonging to create a heartwarming story celebrating the complexity of modern Australia, or should I say modern life in Australia. So that sounds very, very sweeping and epic, and that is called The Lost Girl by Judith C. Deene-Freeman, and I hope I'm pronouncing the surname correctly. That can be found under our contemporary and Aussie tales, so contemporary genre and Aussie tales.
Very good.
Now, Judith also has another book under our Aussie tales, and this is also a Woolshed Bay story, and it is called Starting Over. So Starting Over follows the lives of 3 young women, all new arrivals in the small coastal town of Woolshed Bay on the York Peninsula, stunning York Peninsula, should I say, in South Australia, where they become friends. Erin is the troubled younger sibling of a successful Adelaide professional family, banished to Woolshed Bay to work as a nurse at the hospital. The family hopes that a stint in the country away from bad company will help turn her life around. Rebecca is returning to Woolshed Bay after many years' absence, suffering burnout from her challenging work as a doctor for Médecins Sans Frontières, but also to care for her sick father. Gabby is from Melbourne, a lawyer dismissed from her family's legal firm for sexual misconduct and exiled to Woolshed Bay to work for her cousin. A heartwarming novel, the story arc follows their growing friendship as they start new lives in Woolshed Bay. Here they encounter quirky locals, drug-running gangsters, a religious sect, new challenges at every turn, and also life-changing relationships. Overcoming danger and prejudice, they each find love and happiness with 3 very different men in very unexpected ways. And that is Starting Over by author Judith C. Deene-Freeman. So
That's a lot in a single book.
Yeah, so 2 Woolshed Bay stories there. Both can be found under our Aussie Tales, and it sounds like some really cool, rollicking Australian epic epic yarns, I suppose. And I love the idea that one is quite a sweeping tale of these identical twins, and all across the breadth of this massive landscape coming together and the impact has on the lives. But then in Starting Over, you've got this small coastal town setting, and it's all just what the happenings in there of all the different characters that find themselves. I love the idea of that, and I'm going to think I'm going to try and get a copy of that because I do love York Peninsula. I do love the atmosphere of those little coastal towns.
Yeah,
on
you
the
want
peninsula.
to recognise the places.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. So the final book I'd like to spotlight is, of course, a novel by today's very special guest, Ishmael A. Soledad. The novel is titled Sha'kert, End of Night. So I have brought attention to this book before, but I thought I'd re-spotlight it in preparation for the wonderful conversation that I was at the pleasure of being able to be a part of. And so Sha'kert, End of Night is described as the following. Greg and Lou learn that their daughter has a terminal illness. In their desperation, they make a deal from which there is no return. When their crimes are exposed, their world is turned upside down. Meanwhile, Henry wants nothing more than to leave his Amish community behind, even as their land is under threat, their traditions under fire, and their faith faces its greatest test. But his mother is his world. Where she goes, so too will he. Circumstances bring these two worlds together. A family banished to the edge of the galaxy, a community praying for a new life and the reorientation of their destiny. But when fate abandons them to an uncharted, inhospitable planet, some struggle for survival while others embrace the opportunity to explore this strange new world. Relationships are tested, beliefs are tried, and emotions are pushed to the limit. Yet Sha'kert has a place for all. Quite a setting there for a couple of very different cultures, or shall we say belief systems, or reasons to be travelling across the stars and land on an unexpected planet.
Yeah.
So that is Sha'kert, End of Night. Yeah, very interesting. Obviously that can be found under our science fiction genre. And, of course, that leads perfectly into today's guest, as I mentioned, Mr. Ishmael A. Soledad, or Ish as he prefers to be called. I was so lucky to have the opportunity to talk with him. For all of our wonderful listeners out there, unfortunately, we did have some technical difficulties or technical issues, should I say, as you do with technology. But nonetheless, I don't think it's taken away anything from, such a lot of profound subject matter and some really intriguing discussions led by Ish, and definitely left me with so much to think about, and I could have talked for hours, and I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to talk with him again. But such a great opportunity. And Sha'kert is I think I have not read it yet, but you have.
I have read it,
Veronica, and I suspect it prompts a lot of thought, or at least a lot of themes to think about, judging by the way the chat I had with Ish.
Yeah, some challenging confrontations or conversations even, because it wasn't necessarily as, a good proportion of sci-fi. There's sometimes a fair bit of violence and that kind of thing, but this, it's understated in this book, definitely.
Well, how about we jump to the interview, because that was such fabulous fun and so thought-provoking, and I'm going to prick your brain a little bit more after. So, ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Mr. Ishmael A. Soledad. Ladies and gentlemen, our next guest on the Australian Book Lovers podcast is the author of short story compilations Hawking Radiation, as well as Sex and the Single Cosmonaut, and feature-length debut Sha'kert, End of Night. Now, his writing has been described as genuine and heartfelt, insightful and raw. He weaves tales of desperation, isolation, separation, and, ultimately, discovery that manages to comment on the ills and obligations of modern society while screaming at us to find our own reason for living. He is also a regular contributor to Antipodean science fiction webzine and podcast. He is a hardback book lover, and maybe we'll find out a little bit later, maybe just he could be the very first science fiction author to educate us all just a little bit in the intricacies of the Amish community. So, as you mentioned earlier, I'm very happy to call you Ish Soledad. Thank you so much for joining the Australian Book Lovers podcast. How are you?
I'm excellent, Darren. Thank you for making the time to talk to me.
No, it is an absolute pleasure. And look, I guess we get probably going to jump down many a cosmic rabbit hole, I'm not thinking, on this episode. So before we do that, I'm wondering if you might be kind enough just to share with all of our listeners a little bit about yourself and perhaps how your relationship with writing was formed and how it became such an important and integral part of your life.
Yeah, I'm a Brisbane resident. I have been for many years. So normal sort of domestic relationship, and with my partner, I do have a somewhat untamed cat, like a few of us do. So, but she's currently locked out of the room at the moment. And basically, I have been a paper pusher in terms of my work day to day. And yes, that's basically it. There's nothing overly exceptional about what I do, I think, for a living or for a life. But the one thing that's been constant all the way through my life from childhood is my love of books. I blame my parents for that. I blame my father in particular. For some reason, when I was very, very young, he started getting those old Reader's Digest compressed books.
Yes.
Some of you might remember those. They cut the heart out of the novel and make it down into 3 pages, War and Peace in a paragraph.
But you did get 4 books in one volume.
Well, exactly. And they look good on the shelf as well. Even if you didn't read them, there's something about a hardback on the shelf. So yeah, books have been a part of my life since then. And when I was very, very young, I started to get into the science fiction in a big way. So things like the old Asimov and the Heinlein and the A.E. Van Vogt stuff, the paperback screamers that you could get. So I've always read it. And a few years ago, I started to think to myself, well, maybe there's something I could do. I could start writing as well. And so I started doing some short stories. I guess it just started. I had ideas and I thought, well, I can do this. Maybe I'll give it a whirl. I might be good or I might be bad. But if you don't try, you never know. So I started writing some short stories. And after a year or two, a couple of them started to be picked up on some of the webzines. And so I thought, well, that's good. I'll keep going with the short stories. And I was having a bit of fun with that until about 3-4 years ago now. I realised that everything I'd done in the short stories, I really wanted something longer, something bigger to actually develop a story. So a novel length piece of work was the way to go with that. And underneath it all, I guess I feel privileged. I've read a lot of amazing stuff from a lot of amazing writers over the years, and we all have. And it just sort of dawned on me that, hey, I've read all this stuff, and okay, you pay for your novels, you pay for your books, you pay for all those things, obviously through the stores, but all this stuff's been made available to me. If I can give a little bit back, that'd be a good thing, and maybe someone out there would like it, maybe a few people would find it enjoyable. So that was the driver behind it, and then everything flowed from that. And when I started off writing it, I had not illusions, that's not the right word. I didn't feel that I'd get a publisher or anything like that immediately. I was thinking, well, maybe someone would like it. Maybe I'll just put it out for free on the web. But, things seem to have gone a different path, which is great. So
the best path of all, the unexpected, but the, I guess, illuminating, or what do they say? The fun, good surprise path.
Yeah, they could hear the scream apparently from Darwin when I got the message about it. So that was good.
Well, isn't it funny? You mentioned, having grown up with so many of those science fiction authors and tales and start to formulate your own short stories. And I suspect we come from a little bit of the same, background. A lot of those authors I grew up with as well. But at some point, at first, I guess, when we're younger, or I could speak for myself, of course, I'm curious if it's the same for yourself. The first stage, I guess, is trying to emulate some of your favourite authors and maybe even reproducing some of the stories with a little twist. But there's somewhere along the way, there's that dividing line. I guess we all slip as writers from emulating and trying to, emulate, I suppose, for want of a better word. But then somehow we drift over to a point where we're actually adding to the body of work that is science fiction or whatever genre you write in. And and then becoming a part of that sort of ether of stories and knowledge. So it's a cool little transition to make.
Yeah, it is. I think everyone's got a voice, and this is one of the things. I mean, social media now. I mean, I'm amazed with social media. I mean, I don't want to give away my age. I mean, it's not a state secret, but I'm not exactly pulling out the false teeth. But social media to me is amazing. I didn't even think when I was 18 or 19, I couldn't have even imagined things like the internet, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of it. Didn't even know they couldn't imagine it. And one of the things is, I know it's a bit cliched perhaps, but I'm coming into contact with people I wouldn't in a million years have met in my life otherwise. I mean, through these things, and it's amazing to me that the more and more people I meet, I find that they've all got a slightly different voice. You might look at somebody that you think, well, they're a whatever they are, they're a person in this circumstance with this. There's always a difference or a nuance or a viewpoint they can bring in. And it's exactly as you say, Darren, with the writing. You get to that point when you realise, hold on, I've got something different to say perhaps. It might not be earth-shattering, but it might be a little bit different or a little bit different way to put it. And, it takes a little bit of a leap of faith to actually go down that path rather than think, well, I'll just write like they have before.
Especially with today's technology, you never can tell, who out there is going to be really touched by what you write, or who might, gain a whole new level of understanding about a certain aspect in life from what you write, whether it be, a short story, book, whatever it might be. So that's a really, really beautiful part about technology. And it kind of, if I ever have to wake up and try and find a bit of hope, it is that we, ultimately, there's a lot of barbs and thorns that comes in the rose garden, but the technology that is evolving is, or at least has the capability of, transcending and bringing us all together. Because soon, the idea of language will break down in the sense of, the technology is all but there now, where essentially it will translate different languages on the fly, on the instant. So imagine, being able to walk in another city or, write or share messages and knowledge with somebody who speaks a completely different language to you, and you can understand each other to a certain degree, but far better than if it was up to me to study 10 years to try and work out how to speak the language. It will soon be in the palm of our hands, and that's just mind-blowing.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, it'll put a lot of French high school teachers out of business, but I think they'll be quite happy about it. But
I think you might be right there. And yet, French was definitely one of the subjects I butchered in my early high school days. But look, speaking about putting stories out there, and seeing how you can reach out in this global audience, your first collection, I understand it's the first collection, Hawking Radiation. Now, interesting description. It reads as aliens destroying relationships, a father's dying wish for his son, love, telepathy and puberty, suicidal androids, the music of the future, purple dragons, little girls and machine gun toting rabbits, one promise that changes the world. Now, understand that particular book, Hawkins Radiation, is made up of 23 sci-fi short stories. So I'm just wondering, as far as your first collection goes, do you think it's a reflection of a lifelong passion for science fiction or spec fiction and philosophy? Because by the sounds of it, there's quite a bit of philosophy involved in your writing. Or do you think it represents more of a shift in your focus of your internal musings about the world that you're in and what you've learnt as you've grown through and moved through it, and what you feel the future might bring? So is it all those stories, you think they capture the original passion and love, or do you think they're a reflection on the future that you've gained?
Oh, that's a good question. You said there'd be some good questions. That's up there. That's a really good one, Darren.
Try.
Look, well, Hawking Radiation. The actual title itself probably describes what it is. So, it's without wanting to go into it too much, but around a black hole is an accretion disk, and as we know, as I'm assuming a lot of people know, matter that falls into a black hole, that's it. It's gone forever. And Stephen Hawking actually proposed or posited that there would be some sort of radiation that would come from the accretion disk as it went into the black hole and would escape. A random, if you like, outflow of radiation. So for me, Hawking Radiation was that. I'm finding my feet through those short stories as a writer. So I was trying different things. So I had to laugh, machine gun toting rabbits. I had a lot of fun with that short story.
Oh, I have no doubt you did.
A lot of fun with that one. But yeah, it's when you go through it and people do and they have a look at it, and it probably comes out in the next one a little bit more. There's a development there for myself of working with some of the usual science fiction things about things happening, or conflict or discovery or alien sort of things. First contact or the evil aliens in the cupboard, like the guy that melts the girl in the ice cream truck, but that's for someone else to read. And the movement away from that into, the science is great around it, but what matters, or what I think makes a better story perhaps, is maybe the characters inside it. So it's a collection of the early stuff. Some of it goes back to 99 when I first started toying around with this, and some of them are a little bit later. But yeah, so it's a hodgepodge. There's nothing that holds it together as a theme, really. apart from the fact they're short stories, and as I've developed along, you can see some of the progressive path there. All of them have been published in one form or another on websites that have either been here or have collapsed or are still going on, like Antipodean.
You've kind of answered one of my follow-up questions, which was, whether, maybe not at the time, but looking back on the collection now, if you felt there might be a common thread, found within stories. And you mentioned maybe it's more a case of it's just a representation of your progression in writing. But I'm curious, from an author's perspective, when it came to putting the collection together, was there a temptation to get in there and sort of apply all the new tricks you've learned as a writer to kind of, re-edit or remaster? Or were you happy to sort of have it as a collection and show that growth that you have on the page?
I had to grit my teeth with it, to be honest with you, Darren, because I honestly, when I put it together and I looked at the first couple of stories that I wrote, I thought, oh boy, if I put that out there, I'm just toast. They get a look at this, I'm just thinking that's the end of me. I might as well take up badminton or something. But then I got hold of, and it's a bit of an aside, Philip K. Dick. There's a whole heap of, as you know, he's a prolific author. He was a prolific author. I think he's dead now. I've got 5 of his short story collections stuck in the bookshelf, and they're all the good stuff, like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sleep, all those sort of things. My wife actually got me a collection of his very early stuff. And when I read that, I thought, well, hold on. This stuff isn't as good as as the stuff that came along later. And you can actually see him developing through his writing. It's out there. So I thought, well, maybe, hey, if someone like that can do it and can think, yeah, it's fair enough to do it, then maybe I should as well. And, I think that when you write, I think going back and revisiting it later, this is a personal opinion, obviously, but going back and revisiting it later, I think there's a tendency that you might actually miss what you were trying to do in the first place. So some of those short stories, yeah, they're sort of a bit harsh, maybe some of the short stories, but if I went through and smoothed them over, what are they in the end? There's something different, and they may not do what I hoped they would do at the time.
As a musician, I think it's kind of, and a writer, but I like to sort of compare it to, if I discover a band that I really like and they've got, a bit of a repertoire or a bit of a back collection, I don't expect their first album to always be as good as their latest album. And I would hate to not, but then at the same time, I'd hate to go back and realise I can't listen to their first album because it's been remastered, with re-edits and re-recording so that the original is completely gone. Because then in essence, it's a cover version, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been so tempting with some of my stories. I've gone in, editing wise, definitely gone and fixed some bad editing mistakes. But as far as the original writing, I think it's just a matter of also like a painting. You can't go back and just keep going over the painting, can you?
No, well, that's right, exactly. I mean, it's like you get. I don't get into this argument ever because I've lost it so many times before. But you talk to people about what was Star Wars, the very first movie when it first came out. What is it, episode 4 now, whatever. You can't get, as I understand it anyway. Maybe George Lucas has got one in his basement somewhere in his nuclear fallout shelter. I don't know, but to get an actual cut of that first Star Wars film as it screened in the theaters in 70, whatever it was. 77. Apparently it's not there. Apparently there's bits that have been added in, tweaked over the years as he's gone back and revisited what he's done, which, he's got reasons, and obviously the reasons have worked. The man's not short of a couple of dollars, and it remains as an iconic film. But, to bring back the experience of being an 8-year-old kid and seeing that movie and not understanding most of it, but just seeing, 93 feet of screen exploding in front of your face, you want to get back to see that. The rawness of it, I guess, is the thing. And later maybe slicker, but it just doesn't have that hit, that rawness.
No, and I think it's a case of wearing your mistakes proudly on your chest or proudly on your sleeve because you don't know anything better. And there's no fear. Of course, I think there's a little bit of fear of how it's going to be perceived. It will result in editing and maybe the over editing. But I like to think of a little touch of history there. Well, not history, but at least a relic of the original version. I do have a 400-foot reel of 8mm Star Wars.
Whoa.
They can only be played on the old, Super 8 or 8mm projectors. So, but I'm pretty damn certain that one hasn't been touched up or had any effects added in.
That's armed guard territory, Darren. Hey, it's good.
Oh no, I don't know about that, but it's definitely straight from the I would dare say late 70s. So yeah, it has been tampered with, but there you go. Also, definitely doesn't have the good sound or the colour anymore either. So, well, what I was interested, speaking of music, musicians and records, one of the subjects in that description for Hawking radiation was the music of the future. So tell me, without giving away the essence of the story, what do you think what do you think the feel of the music of the future is going to be?
It's a very, very I'm trying to find the word. I'm not using a fusion. Fusion's not quite right, but it's a complete melt of what is here now. I think that everything that's gone before, and people reinvent things as they go along, but I think there's going to be elements of that come back into the future music, and it'll actually jump across from just being purely audio into being sensory and visual as well. So there are some performance artists, I think is the right phrase, who link their work with music. There's a guy currently in, I think it's the Biennale in Vienna at the moment or somewhere, who's sitting basically on an FND amp with a guitar. He plays every day, Australian fellow, plays every day in his guitar, and he's got a series of photographs and pictures that move behind him in time with this music. But it's not keyed so much to what he's playing. It's the pace and the tenor of what goes on, and it's nearly randomized. So for me, it'll blend in with everything else, as everything else is coming to a convergence. That's a good word, a convergence with technology and how we interact with that. I see music going from being just purely, or in that particular, not my short story anyway, from a purely oral or audio thing, bringing more of the tact, the visual and the sensory stuff in with it. So you just don't get your ears as the sense that experiences music, but you have your eyes and your sense of touch bringing it through. And for that particular story, the setting of the music is actually hanging outside the Crab and the Horsehead Nebulae.
Oh, okay.
They tie into the music as well. So without giving too much away, Darren, but yeah, that's where I see it going, or one of the ways it could go, let's say.
Well, I don't think you're too far off the mark. I know I love all things technological, and as well as gaming, as any red-blooded man does, I suppose, or anybody who's grown up with computers does, not just men, everybody. But playing with the Oculus or the virtual reality. So I know, on the Oculus Quest, for example, one of the experiences you can do, you stand in a room and you have two controllers. It's called the Music of the Spheres, and it was put together with a number of artists and musicians. And in essence, you're like this invisible giant standing there with the universe or different galaxies in front of you, or all around you, 360. But you can reach out and touch different planets or different solar systems that will generate different sounds depending on their distance and stuff like that. So yeah, I think you're right. It definitely is a sensory, visual and audio melting or convergence, to use your word. I suspect that could be something I'd look forward to experiencing in the future, definitely when it comes to music.
Yeah, it's a step up from standing in front of a stack of speakers and letting it rip through you, but that's another thing in itself that's good.
Yeah, that's definitely not, still using a few of your senses. Absolutely. And it also causes the loss of some of your senses over time too, as I've discovered.
Quite true.
Standing next to a drum kit and those big zildjian cymbals, they can make the nerves in the corner of your mouth twitch. But now, so considering we're talking about, what the possibility of music might be in the future, and about your short stories, for Hawking radiation, maybe even Sex and the Single Cosmonaut, which I want to touch on briefly in a sec. But I'm just curious how a lot of these stories came about. So, for example, were they inspiration that came when you're, doing whatever you're doing by the day, and you make an observation and you think, oh, wow, bang, there's a story there? Or were you, doing a lot of internal questioning the existence, etc., and, incorporating your experiences and then thinking about the future and, really drawing these tales from, trying to make sense of the world and what the future might bring? Or were they more reflections on what you were experiencing at the time?
It's a combination of a few. The reflection of experiences to a little bit. I mean, it's some of the things I go through, trying to explain those through stories, or try to work through them in short stories a little bit. A lot of it was simply by my reading. So I read reasonably widely, so that starts the brain ticking over. And for me, with the short stories, a lot of it was first thing in the morning. I'd spring out of bed and I'd wander off, and all of a sudden this idea would drop in the back of my head. And it would be not so much, well, here's a plot line for a short story, but it would be something like, well, what would happen if, or if you had this, what would happen? Or you're trying to work out this particular thing, what would happen there? So a lot of it just seems to filter out and through. And I think it's as you say, it's the experiences working through myself. And then some of them are reflective pieces that seem to come out of where I am and where I'm traveling and what I'm looking at around me in the natural environment, particularly when I go out and go bush or go traveling. There's things that seem to pop out there that trigger them. And I know there's a lot of stuff in Sha'kert that's a deliberate thought about what may happen in the future, how things may evolve and what potentially we've lost. But there's not a great deal of those in the short stories. Mm-hmm. And that was part of the drive, I think, to do a novel rather than to continue at that time anyway with doing short stories. There was a bit more of a scope I wanted to explore with that. So, and one of them's a bet. The gun-toting rabbits piece, I'll be honest, and I'll own up to it, was a bet. A friend at work was from Taiwan, and she said, well, these are really nice, but what can I read to my 7-year-old cousin? And I said, what does she like? And she said, dragons and rabbits. Okay, fine. You want dragons and rabbits? I'll give you dragons and rabbits, but they're going to carry RPGs and Kalashnikovs. So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned that some of the inspiration, as in like instant inspiration, came from heading out bush, and that's something I do quite often as well. And I'm just curious. I know I've got my own personal sort of belief systems, or not belief systems, but I know a few things that are out there that trigger certain cool things for me to contemplate. Stars, of course, being one of them. But besides the obvious, what sort of things out in the bush you think help trigger your science fiction imagination? That yearning to write about what might lie out there beyond the stars.
The sense of scale is something that just continually digs at me when I'm out there. We live in urban jungles, most of us. In Australia, we're particularly bad with that. Most of us live in that small strip around the eastern coast and that tiny bit over in Perth. But when you travel for a few hours inland and you can stop somewhere and drop a tent or a swag and you look around and there's just nobody anywhere, and the experience, and you sit back and you look up and it's just empty above you, the stars, and it's crystal clear. You just get a sense of exactly how minuscule individual people are in the scheme of things. And for me, that then drives another feeling, which is a desire to understand more about the benefits of something that I think we're losing more over time as we go along as a society. And it's not nothing overly revolutionary, I guess, but more and more as we go along, I think there's less and less opportunity to really come to grips with ourselves as individuals, as people, as a single unit. So, regardless of which way our individual lives go and, relationships and all the rest of that, and children, in the end, we are, and I'll be not crude about it, but I suppose blunt, we are a sack of flesh, and we're divided from everybody else by one barrier. And, and that's our skin, basically. I mean, that's it. We are an individual being, but we tend to live most of our lives not relating as that. We relate as some sort of group, a family group or a tribal group, I guess.
A projection we'd
ways,
like to
racial
fit
group.
into, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so that to me has a large prodding effect on the writing as well. And then from that, seeing how other people and other cultures actually manage that as well with themselves. So for me, I have either the misfortune or the good fortune, depending on which way you look at it, that my partner's Finn, from Finland. Now, there's a race of people who have taken the art of silence to the nth degree. Okay. A decent conversation with a Finn is sitting down at a table for an hour, talking for 3 minutes and having long periods of zero between it. And it's absolutely normal and absolutely expected. Whereas on the other side of it,
you're a brave man. I don't think I could do that. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, yeah. Well, I've got friends in America, very close friends, and if there's not screaming and shouting and fist pumping, all that going on 59 and a half minutes in an hour, they think you're clinically depressed and need to see a shrink. So yeah. it's that sort of thing, and that drives me. And that sort of introspection, I guess, it breeds on me and brings out some of the ideas, and it's sort of where I am as well individually in my own personality. I'm more an introvert than an extrovert. So I tend to slide down to that side of the scale very rapidly. Yeah. So for me, that's where the travel and the bush and the emptiness and just wandering around in space, not space, but space as in the room in the outback and out west. That's where that pushes me.
It is interesting to say that, because that idea of coming to, you know, I guess a more interpersonal, personal relationship with yourself, in the sense of being that flesh and bone machine, it becomes more of a, I guess, for want of a better word, a bit more of a profound thing to look into sometimes when you're out bush. For me, at least, and maybe for yourself as well, because if I'm sitting out there and, you know, I'm in the middle, well, not in the middle of nowhere, but as in there's nobody around. I can't see any houses. I can't see anything. And for example, a kangaroo will hop past, or, you know, on dusk you see a wombat poke his head out, or, you know, or the other day, man, had the old red-bellied black snake come slithering towards us till, you know, he decided he's going to do a detour. But then I'm just one of another group of animals, if that makes sense. I'm one, the kangaroo's one, and the wombat's one, for example, to use those three animals as an example. It's not myself with 25 humans and one kangaroo, where we're just the observer. It's just me as a human, that kangaroo, and that wombat, and we each are representing ourselves in that space. And it's a very strange thing. But yeah, it's funny how I think so much science fiction can come from that isolation, and of course with the stars above. But it's just a beautiful thing. And like I said, so many of us live in these like concrete jungles. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's nowhere to hide when you're there by yourself. There's only one other person there, and you can't hide from yourself. And no one can help you hide from yourself either, which can be interesting the first couple of times.
It can be challenging, yes. On two fronts. One, oh God, do I have to stay in my own mind all this time without any distractions? And two, this skin's really soft and everything out here is trying to cut me, scrape me, tear me apart, you know, burn me, poison me, prickle me. So don't forget your thongs, people.
Yeah, exactly. Come to Australia, bring your life insurance and the thongs.
And it's 2022, making 5 pluggers. So,
yes.
Now, I'd love to. I definitely want to move on to Sha'kert. But before we do, I just want to touch on your second compilation, which is Sex and the Single Cosmonaut. Now, that has an equally intriguing description. So, eternity gifted by your dead brother, your body for your grandson's future, when even the memory of you is too much, love, loss, and obsession across 100 million kilometres. There are no superheroes, no giants amongst women or men, simply misfits, dystopians, flawed, broken people caught by circumstance. And that is a collection with a little bit more than the previous edition, which is, this one's got 30 short stories. Now, the description seems to, like, as in the description, gifted by dead brother, your body for your grandson's future. It seems to be sort of hinting at or suggesting some sort of dark-edged science fiction. And yet the title seems a little bit playful as well. So I'm wondering, is that an intentional hint that maybe there's a common theme in all the stories, or was it just, did it seem fitting at the end when you sat back and looked at it? How do you come up with a title like that for stories that include, that are based on descriptions like I've just read out?
Right, okay. Well, the common thread through this are flawed people making the best possible fist of things in a world that hates them, essentially. So they're trying to achieve something that they possibly can't. So when we're talking about the giving your body for your grandson, basically, it's a woman that uses herself as an organ smuggler is probably the best way to call it. So impoverished nation, her basic job is that there's no way in her society for anyone to get ahead unless they have some form of augmentation done to their body, computer augmentation, AI, bionics, whichever way that you want to see it. She's in a position where she cannot, like most of her friends, can't get out of the pile. The only person she has left is her grandson, and he's going to be destined to the same future as her. The only way she can make money is to basically sell her body as a mule for organs to go into another country. So she's smuggling it through much the same way, well, not much the same way, but in the same way, same general way as a drug mule might do. They have some choices, but the choice they choose to make is to try and drag drugs into a high-income country. She does the same thing. She gets caught, but for her, there's a small happy ending that the son gets the money a little bit early and gets to do what he does, but her life basically is forfeit in the process. So it's that sort of feeling about it. It's a way out in a different future, but it's a way out that has no real escape for the person concerned. Now, with Sex and the Single Cosmonaut as the title, the short story that's tied into is a failed mission to Jupiter. A man stranded there alone, orbiting Jupiter, who, and this is probably the warning for the kiddies that are sensitive, and it's where the ABC usually puts in, you need to seek help if you've heard this, eventually ends up with his suicide because his wife back on Earth is gone, and the only thing that reminds him of his wife is Jupiter itself. He sees her in that. So he's here in a probe by himself. He's cut off from her. She doesn't exist. He sees her in this planet, and to him it's an intolerable cruelty. And he chooses to end his life in one way. And I was drawn back to and I don't know if people and kids in school get it these days, but from my particular experience, sex education in school formally, rather than informally, which is how most people get it, but formally began with a nice little book called Sex on a Desert Island.
Can't say I've read that one. I do remember some overhead slides that brought a few giggles.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think it was burned, and I think it was probably a great idea. So it's this sort of thing. This guy's basically cut off, frustrated in a lot of ways, but the main thing is that anchor to his life is gone. And he loses himself basically in Jupiter as opposed to wanting to lose himself in her. So that's where that came from. So it's a play, yes, but it's also a reflection of his mindset when he's there. And when you look at that with Hawking radiation, that's the shift in the short stories to things being driven by the characters and the experience rather than by the tech or the worlds that are around them, which then leads on to the novel.
Beautiful, beautiful. And there you go. See, I suspected a little bit of cheekiness in the title, and in reality it's the opposite. And maybe it's taken the presumption of cheekiness and turning it into something heartfelt and character-driven. There you go. Before we jump into the big one, which is Sha'kert, End of Night, if you look back across both of the collections, are there any stories that you've already marked for future feature-length consideration? Like, have you sort of ticked or highlighted a few and said, those are the ones that I can really get into and maybe make a feature-length novel? Or is it just a case that you're happy to let them sit there and wait for some fresh stuff? When I say fresh, that's probably the wrong way to do it, because I know what you mean. So many of my short stories are like, I want to make a full one. I want to do a big, do a full-length version of it. I want to explore this part and that part. Or are you quite disciplined, maybe more disciplined than I am, and to say no, it was a short story idea, and I'll move on to my feature-length ideas.
I have one that's in the back of my mind that's sitting on the shelf for later. And that's part of the Sex and the Single Cosmonaut collection in there, and that's in the name of the Father, and that's essentially a Spanish priest who's part of the Middle Ages Inquisition, traveling around, and he's doing what they did in those days, which is a rather violent procession of a rather violent thing to poor people. But for him, he's actually being used by aliens who are performing biological experiments on people. So the aliens, in the backstory to that one is the aliens come down, they select a person or an animal, they're taking core samples from plants, peoples, etc. His job is that they shove him under the auspices of the Inquisition into the area where they've been to clean up after them, which usually means burning at the stake. And this guy is conflicted completely by the process. So the short story looks at a little bit of his backstory and then the two burnings that happen in one small village, but the chance to expand that into something novel-sized is there over a period of time, because I'll leave them, when I leave the short story, they leave the priest with the threat that if he interferes again, they're going to make this poor sod live forever. And that's something that he does not want, because obviously he doesn't live with the guilt. So there's one there that sits on the back shelf, but the majority of them, I'm quite happy to leave them as short stories. I'm quite happy to leave them in there. There is one that may find its way into the current book I'm writing, But we'll see how that works, whether I can use her in that way.
Well, that last description sounds quite existential, to say the least, on its own merits. But I did have one more question. I think I'm going to leave this one to last far as before we jump into Sha'kert, because I think it's going to tie into all of it. And like I said, we can go down all the different cosmic rabbit holes. We're going to come to Sha'kert right now, which is Sha'kert End of Night. And one of the awesome reviews that you've already got for the book describes it as a slow burn but fascinating story about making a life where you find yourself, an entrancing exploration into how humans interact with technology and how far they'll go to preserve their culture. And that review was from Whispering Stories. I guess after 2 monster short story collections, you come out with this full-length novel. And judging, I haven't had the opportunity to read it yet, but judging by its premise, the description and the reviews that I have read, I think it's safe to say it's not without a few complexities. So for all our listeners out there, you've heard us talking about your short story collections and all the inspiration behind a lot of the, you love the science fiction. I'm wondering, when it comes to Sha'kert, End of Night, which I'm guessing is a massive book, can you perhaps let our listeners, or give our listeners, a brief introduction to the book and let them know what kind of adventures are waiting for them in the pages?
Okay, right.
So take your time. Yeah.
No. It's
deep
good.
Stuff.
Yeah, just trying to okay, because it's probably the usual way, and you come across it with most authors when they've written something that is so not just going to say full of it, but that's the wrong expression to use here. They're so probably full of the information about it, they want to drop everything down. I don't want to do that, because that would, I guess, that would just leave me talking for hours for nothing. But I think I know that the heart of Sha'kert, and when we talk about the character-driven short stories that led me through, the other thing that we did touch on was the fact that I wanted to start writing something a little bit different than some of the stuff I've read. Not that the stuff that I've read and the authors that have gone before or around now bad or second rate or anything like that. Most are brilliant, and the ideas that come out are amazing. I did want to try and do something that didn't involve a war or a violent confrontation from large groups of people, because one, I didn't feel comfortable going down that route as an individual, because I don't think I could carry off that sort of story long term. And two, everybody else does it so well. I mean, I'm not going to try and get in on that side of things. So the question that came up into my mind, it was one of these random moments walking down the street thinking about something that had happened in my work, was that when people come into conflict, and in general around us, when we look around at work or social life or home, or playing in a band or playing rugby in your team or whatever you do, it's very, very rare that you get somebody that's just a complete and utter fruit bat that just decides to make someone else's life miserable and just goes for them. That does happen, but it's not the general circumstance. In general, what I see, or what I think I've seen, is that it tends to come about when you get two people who think they're doing the best thing they can do, either for themselves or everybody else, but what they want is just totally diametrically opposed. One wants to go left, one wants to go right. They end up smashing themselves in the middle. And it's not because either of them decided to go that way. It's just they were trying to do the best they could. And they might be good people, whatever a good person is, or moral, or whatever we call that. But conflict just arises. And even as they try and sort that conflict out, it leads to further issues. So that's where Sha'kert, the original idea of it, came from. And in pursuing that, I started to think, well, what would lead to something that would push people around a little bit in those circumstances? What would turn a normal guy, normal inverted commas, what would turn a guy into to do something that he ordinarily wouldn't do when he's pushed that way? And that was the trigger for the child in the story. So his child driving in one way, and then on the other side, the party that's going to come in conflict with him. I wanted to find something in there that would push them again in that same sort of way, without using the same sort of thing. A dying child on one side's fine, but you bring two in, it seems a little bit too coincidental. So that's where I brought the Amish into it, and a threat to their way of life, and a threat to the way they wanted to live, to people who essentially, passive is probably the wrong word, but who tend to want to live at peace with people as long as people leave them in peace. And that's the genesis of Sha'kert, and all flowed from that particular point. So the story itself, in a nutshell, is a story of two families. So there's a man, a woman, and a child who are normal people for the time and the place they're in, who are forced to do something illegal and completely against their way of doing things to protect the life of their child, on one hand. And on the other hand, it's about a man and his family, an Amish man, who, to protect his way of life and his beliefs, is forced to do something that he wouldn't have considered before, and actually leads to conflict not only inside his community, but inside his family. And the drivers from both of them, they're both doing what they believe is the right thing for their families, the things they have to do to survive. But when they're drawn together out of Earth on the next place that they find themselves, which is Sha'kert, the planet itself, those same drivers push them immediately into conflict as well. Even though they do try initially to do the right thing by each other, they're forced to do, they have no choice. But eventually it comes out, they're incompatible.
It raises so many questions, doesn't it, as far as the idea of space exploration, inhabiting another planet, taking different cultures across. And a quote that's always stuck by me, so I guess I was in my late teens when I read it, and I've used this as kind of a filter or a looking glass to look at all the news I always see, and with it, because I never want to pass judgment, although subconsciously I guess we all do at some point. But the quote was, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't know who said it and I don't know where it came from, but essentially it was, if you take away a person's reason to live, you give them a reason to die. And I thought, that was fascinating, because if I woke up tomorrow and my whole suburb bombed, there are people, in dire need of medical assistance and all that sort of stuff, then I've got a reason to die. I'll put myself in a position to defend, or whatever it might be that's required, or I'll go seek medicine, whatever it might be, without any sort of repercussions for my own life. That's not something I'll do tomorrow for the person on the bus. Do you know what I mean? Or the train, or in the traffic. But so I get that. But you mentioned something really interesting as well, and that was that sudden violence or combat or war, however you want to describe it, aggression in general, is not usually just two random people coming together to decide to try and hurt or kill each other. There's usually some sort of moral standing that they don't want to have stripped away from them. And isn't that funny that the morals that they're willing to protect include, they don't want or not be forced to break, include killing somebody or going to war, which is kind of, isn't that against all morals? So that's very interesting in of itself. The idea that to put, two different belief systems together on a lonely planet, I'm not sure if that's the plot of the book, but I'll just love the idea of what's more important? Is it representing our belief system and our identity, or is it coming together to formulate some sort of technology, which in the end may be something we want to walk away from to get closer to the universe?
Well, this was it's an interesting point that you raised. So to go into Sha'kert maybe in a little bit more detail, when the thing that drives the family that live within the Earth society at the time, they're actually from the Dandenong area, so just don't tell anybody because no one's picked it up in the book yet, but someone will.
Okay.
The thing that drives them from Earth is that while he's trying to protect his daughter or get the medical treatment for his daughter, which he's successful in getting, he actually then becomes party to multiple murders. And they're only, although the gangland people or criminals, he's still party to that. So it's like you say, he's crossed his own moral boundary just by the fact there's somebody else there. It's not his daughter. He's trying to protect his daughter's life, but in order to protect his daughter's life, he's becoming party to the death of other people. And he tries to hide that even from himself, which is a bit of a conflict there. And on the other side of it, with the Amish, and this is maybe one of the reasons that they appeal to me in this context, is they have a very pacifist, very outwardly understanding viewpoint of people. So they will try and work with people. There's cases of an Amish person being actually struck by a drunken driver and killed. And the next day, the Amish person's wife is over at the person who was driving the car trying to console them, which to me, it took me a while to even get my head around the whole concept of doing that. But
completely understandable.
They'll do that on the one hand, but then on the on the other hand, with the Amish, they do shun people. So they will turn around if you're part of their church and you cross the boundary too many times, they'll shun you. And it's not simply we won't talk to you in the street. It is basically you don't exist as part of the church as far as they're concerned. So you might be married to someone, doesn't matter. You don't exist to that person. You might be their parent, you don't exist. You might be their child, you don't exist. So there's a softness and there's an absolute harshness. And this family, when they get onto this planet with the other family and the communities are there, they then turn this upon the other family in a very, 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 very heartless way, which is surprising. So it's exploring those issues and the way that dynamic works between them. Yeah. Yeah, and the other element that's tied in there is it's not an empty planet. It seems empty, and that's part of the fun with this, or fun. It's part of the fun with it. It seems empty. So, they were going somewhere else, and for some reason they ended up where they are on Sha'kert. So they're heading towards Melbourne, got towards Sydney, whatever. Different planet from where they were going. It's empty. And the Amish go, fantastic. There's no one around to bother us. This will do perfectly. This is wonderful. It's ours. It's empty. The man, Greg and his family aren't so sure, and he actually finds out that it's actually not empty. You go a few days down the road that way, there's a whole new society down there. There's a very small alien society, and guess what? They've got everything we need. And that's another source, because that brings the demons that the Amish have run away from straight back into their midst. And the person who's brought them back is this guy who's happened to be with them, who doesn't adhere to their faith, isn't listening, and all he sees is that, well, we can survive here barely if we adopt the Amish way, but if we get together with these other group and we learn from them and we work them on the land, then we'll be fine. So there's another level of conflict that drives in from that edge, which wedges them basically away.
And the rabbit holes just keep going down when you bring these sorts of, conflicts, for want of a better word, but also explorations in different ways of integrating or communicating with a completely foreign society. So one of the questions I have here that I did pre-prepare, and that is, reflecting on the quote, which did discuss about, how humans interact with technology and how far we might be willing to go to preserve that technology or to preserve our culture to the point where maybe we even go back or take a step back from technology.
Yeah.
Do you think as a species, like at the moment right now as a human race and as a species on this planet, do we gain or can we gain a closer understanding of, for want of a better word, the ultimate architect of this universe? Do we get a closer understanding through ever-increasing technology, and that is, that sharing technology, working on the shoulders of everyone and coming together and incorporating knowledge and looking to the future? Or do you think stepping away from technology and reflecting more on our inner selves brings us closer? Or do you think there's a middle ground?
Oh, that's a good one. My personal opinion on this is I don't believe that technology is good or bad, or it's divisive or inclusive. I think it's neutral. Everything that's been developed, this is my personal opinion, it sits right in the middle. It's a thing. It's an instrument, or it's a facilitator, or it's an object. And it's the use to which it's put that makes the difference in the outcomes that come from it. So in terms of a spiritual or religious style belief, an ultimate architect or a God figure or a deity, I don't think that technology is a hindrance or a benefit to that. I think it sits in the middle. It's something that's used, but in the end, as individuals, we make up our own minds and our own decisions about how we're going to approach that or how we get closer if we think there's something to get closer to. So, for instance, Second Life, you have an online game there, or online life, if you want to call it. That doesn't necessarily pull you away from God, if you want to use the concept. In and of itself, you can find yourself closer to your idea of God. The game or the technology underneath it is neutral. Again, pulling back to Sha'kert, this is the thing the argument comes up with their leader, the main character from their viewpoint on the book, is that although they believe technology, or one of them believes that technology, as they see it, is neutral, but it's the use that it's put to that's evil or holy, as they express it, they have a hidebound reluctance to actually accept it anyway, which flies in the face of what they say on the other side. So
that's where it gets tricky, isn't it? So you were talking before about the moral one or moral VS versus moral, VS.
Yep.
You know, both feel that they're maybe coming from the right ground, the moral ground, the spiritual ground, the high ground, whatever ground you want to talk about it. And but that at the end it justifies some sort of aggression, because the idea is that it's defending, or at least trying to preserve a belief system. So, which is in essence a culture. So, I guess I think you're right. My personal feeling is that technology is neutral, but at the same time, I think that all the technology in the world here on Earth still hasn't taken away that sort of virus effect of that we still find a reason to fight over the bigger questions here. And if we can't sit out in the bush and look at those stars and realise that, we may be talking about the same thing just in different languages, different symbols, different whatever, and be willing to kill because you'd rather not admit that, that's a problem. So I guess upon your journey to write Sha'kert, End of Night, and a lot of the a lot of musings and a lot of philosophical conversations you must have had with yourself, if we are going to become a star-faring people, for want of a better word, if we are going to have human beings leave here and potentially reach new planets, how do we reach a position of determining what represents our culture as a human race that can depart this earth if the idea of culture is preventing us from leave while it's at war?
The comment that you made earlier about sitting out and looking over your shoulder and seeing the kangaroo wandering off one way, the wombat there, and then the red-bellied black snake off on the other. And all of a sudden you had this realization that, hold on, I'm just another animal in this environment. My hope is that one day we honestly can sit down and look across the borders and across the colours of our skin and across the genders and the labels that we put on ourselves. And we can honestly look each other in the eye and just say, well, look, I'm you, but I'm just a little bit different, and mean it. And when that day comes, and I think it will, and I hope we're around long enough to see it come, because honestly, if we're not, there's going to be all sorts of issues. But when that day comes, I think we'll be prepared to understand that I've got to find the right word. It's not correct to say, or it won't be correct to say there are different cultures. What it'll be correct to actually say is that we are one culture, but we've got an infinite number of ways of expressing it. So
that's
maybe
a really beautiful way to put it, yeah.
Yeah, so to embellish it a little bit more, I had a friend many years ago when I was in Townsville, and he was a Woolgarooga man. And I had the pleasure one day on a road trip of spending a few hours, or a few days actually, out the other side of Boulia with him, just doing nothing, basically, just camping and running around. And from what he showed me and the people that were with him showed me and the way we talked, I understood more and more from him that the only thing that was stopping me being part of their culture and them being part of my culture was the fact I was putting the word culture over what it was that we were doing. We're human. We are the same. I mean, you can prove it, I guess, if you want to go down that path of genetics. What they do and what they believe, and what I do and what I believe, are simply different expressions of the one thing of being human. So to get to the stars, to actually get off this ball of dust and actually survive long enough to understand what it actually is that's going on out there, I think we as a species, we've got to come to the point where we look at each other and say, we honestly are what we are. We are the same. I'm the same as you. You're the same as her. Our cultures, it's the same culture, just for different ways of expressing it. And if we can do that, then we not only get acceptance and we not only get cooperation, we actually get a way to be able to leverage everything that we are and everything that we know for the common good rather than the individual good. That's how I'm thinking of it anyway. That's what I see, and that's what I hope will happen. I don't think I'll be around long enough to see it. It's not something in 50 years unless I've really misjudged. I've done that before, misjudged the young guys and the young girls out of school. Maybe they can do it. But we get to that point, we can do it. If we don't, then all we're going to do is we're just going to argue over the next ball of dust or the next star or the next planet or the next whatever until the cows come home. And really, if we get out there, all we're going to do is export our trouble and our hate.
Yeah, look, I think you've said so many important things there, and I couldn't agree with you more on so many of the points you've raised. But that is an interesting one. If we do become a species that become in the future, and we are talking, science fiction, which means looking to the future, depending on, it would be a wonderful thing to reach that point where whatever group we send to possibly, for example, terraform a planet, for example, there's going to be a core unit of people that will have to go there and do those hard yards before it can become a seed for potential society. And so maybe, by that point, we've agreed that our culture is made up of a million different cultures, ever evolving. So that'll be a beautiful thing. I'm just curious, when you think forward as far as science fiction goes and maybe, reaching out to the stars and other planets, what do you think is going to play a more important part in that initial stage of doing the structure, building and making a new planet, I guess, open to the chance to build a society? Do you think technology is going to play a massive part, if not the entire part, and will continue to do so until such time that it will allow life to sustain, and then religion and belief systems can come on board and cultures? Or do you think that it's the other way around, that the technology won't be able to be, that the people won't be able to maintain relationships without a common belief to push through those perseverances of challenges and unexpected I guess hurdles that are going to come there? Which one do you think they're going to play equal? Do you think one will outweigh the other for a particular time or does one have weight against the other for eternity once we move out of the stars?
I think that initially, whenever it happens, I think without a common culture and the people or the group that are actually trying to push for the stars, the technology is going to be irrelevant, because to use the technology and to even think in terms of how long it's going to take us or someone to get to the stars, to get to a new planet, you have to have a basis for actually going that has a common purpose together. So, for instance, at the moment, I'm not sure there's many multinational organisations or multi-faith organisations that can agree on their own name. We think in terms of 10, 15 years. I mean, we're in the middle of an election right now, and regardless of which way your political beliefs go, it's a 3-year time horizon. And some of the problems we need to talk about and deal with don't fit into 3 years. If we can't agree with some of the things, or even a basic plan to address some of those now, how are we going to sit back and send something out to the stars that might take, well, let's be optimistic, 50 years? If we're really lucky, we know what we're doing and it's close by. Anything that lasts 50 years, I know a couple of companies that have lasted 50 years and a couple of organisations. But just to get a group of people that can do that, the technology has to be there, but you have to have the people to drag that along and to make it happen. Eventually, though, at some point, the technology will take over from the culture, because the technology will become the culture. So at the moment, it's an enabler, but at some point, if it just keeps developing and things go the way that we see them and that you can extrapolate out in the future, maybe the difference or the barrier between flesh and blood and machine, if you want to use it that way, maybe that disappears. And then the technology becomes us. We become the technology, which then becomes the culture, and the whole question disappears in a puff of smoke. We just are, and we just do. But that's, a long way down the track.
Well, there's many scientists who have concluded that maybe the whole universe came from a puff of smoke too. So that would seem fitting as well. Now, I guess one of the final questions I've got for you is, you've got a passion for science fiction. You've got a passion for writing. I have no doubt through a lot of the discussions we've had tonight, sure, some of the stories have come from, reflections or observations, but a lot of them has probably come from questions you've been asking about reality and our place in the universe. So do you feel that science fiction helps us to question our place in the universe, or do you think that the current place we find ourselves in the universe has given birth to science fiction and the quest to unravel potential futures?
I think science fiction allows us to ask questions about where we are and what we're doing. It gives us a playground where we can make the rules and then ask ourselves the questions we want to ask and explore them in a way that doesn't get too diluted or too obfuscated. So there's a lot of instances where science fiction predates reality.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Joe's Logic, for instance, short story from the 50s, that's all about the internet. If you can find it, it's out there somewhere. So there's a lot of that happens. That's fine. But I think that's more a random thing. For every one story that predict something that actually has happened. There's probably 1,000 more that got it wrong. I mean, I haven't got a hoverboard. I haven't got a Jetsons car, so obviously they got it wrong. But we can drag those examples out. Yeah.
Could be our traffic too that has stopped us getting hoverboards or
exactly
hover cars and stuff, because it's bad enough down here in Adelaide on May South Road, let alone imagine if we can go up and down as well. Oh my God. It'll be the end of civilization as we know it.
Yeah, peak out with everybody in helicopters, and half of them got L plates. I mean, my godfathers. Yeah, I know it's troublesome, but I mean, science fiction is always asked us questions about our society. Even go back as far as Jonathan Swift and Gulliver's Travels, which was science fiction. I mean, hey, big people, little people, miniature people running around. The whole thing was a political satire wrapped up in a science fiction cloak, and it's always allowed us the freedom to be able to ask those questions that perhaps we can't get away with in other places. And yeah, so for my own position, science fiction is the vehicle that lets us question where we are and what we're doing and how society is, and make commentary about that. I don't think it defines where we go, but it definitely asks the question whether we got the torch on the path.
Yes, yeah, too true. And yeah, it definitely keeps us moving forward as opposed to going backwards, because we're always looking to the future. And isn't it funny, a good science fiction that lets us be an individual, or place ourselves in an individual's shoes, when it comes to a character, in a future that's only possible if all of us come together, which means part of a massive culture. So, and it means for me, it's the idea of exploring different cultures as well, because a society on a starship that has a multi-generational starship, that's a different culture that doesn't exist here. And it may be one way that it can be done through the stars, who knows. But so there's that macro and micro, isn't it? The individual with the hive mind, for want of a better word. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future when it comes to our science fiction, should I say, our scientific endeavours and our space exploration?
I'm marginally optimistic.
Oh, okay, that's good.
I think there's an awful lot of challenges, and there's an awful lot of potentials for us to fall flat in our face and miss it. But I think that we still have the capacity to rise up, not rise up, sorry, my apologies. We have the capacity to rise to the challenges and overcome them, but I don't think it's going to be as neat and as clean as we'd like it to be.
No, I don't think if ever we had to put a sentence to what the human race represented before we went interstellar, I don't think it was ever going to be neat.
No. I think we might look back at them, and we might look the same way potentially as we do to the Dark Ages now. I think we'll just go, how the hell did we get out of that? Yeah. And that might be the sentiment. Yeah,
quite possibly. But on that note, I like the fact that you're pretty much optimistic, and I just want to thank you, Ish, for all of the conversation we've had this evening, and for being a part of the Australian Book Lovers podcast. And I'd love for you to be able to let our listeners know where they can find all your short stories, your musings, if you've got any blogs, where they can get your books, where they can follow you maybe on social media, anything at all.
Yeah, no, look, I've really appreciated the time and chatting to you about this sort of stuff. I really enjoy batting the ball around a little bit. For the listeners, I mean, my main presence on the interweb at the moment is through Twitter. So my handle on there is Ishmael_Soledad. So you can find me there. And the main author page I have is through my publisher, through Temple Dark Books. That's the main portal at the moment. So my web presence isn't huge. Part of the reason for that is I'm working on the next series of books. So I do tend to get caught up when I'm actually on and looking at things. I guess I'm a junkie in some ways, so I'm damn glad I didn't have this when I went through uni.
Now, next series of books, is it a continuation from Sha'kert, or is it a new series, or is it a secret?
It's no secret. Look, Sha'kert stands by itself. I'm very happy with where it went. I'm very happy where it ended up. And to be honest, to do a sequel to that, no, I like it as it is. The next one, it actually touches on some of the comments that you made before, Darren, about where do we end up, and the potential to go to the stars, and whether it's going to be a neat or a very, very nasty little trip. Yeah, so it's a darker view of life than Sha'kert is. Still character driven, but far darker. So yeah, it's still in progress, still in development. So if people want to keep in touch or just see how it's going, follow me on Twitter. Let me know and I'll follow back. We'll have some conversations. We should be starting to see some movement on the next novel sometime in the next 12 months.
Okay, so it sounds like a pretty busy run to the end of 2022 for you.
Oh, yeah. Better busy than idle, Darren. Better busy than idle.
Absolutely. Well, unless you're out in the bush, which is good time to quietly contemplate, or out in the ocean or something. But
Exactly.
yeah. Now, speaking of isolation and science fiction and planets and stars and the eternity of the universe, given the opportunity, would you be one of the first members of the spaceship to Mars if it meant the possibility of not returning?
Wouldn't have to ask me twice as long as I can sneak out of the house without my wife knowing.
Ah, yes. Well, there's always fine print. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I wouldn't hesitate. Not in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking, isn't it? When if we definitely. I mean, of course, who doesn't want the human race to start exploring other planets? But then it comes down to who's going to go out there with the possibility of never coming back. Now, I personally, I don't know. I could say one way or the other at the moment, but on the day, if I had to wake up and go, today's the day you're going to Mars, I may hit the little eject button. I don't know. I don't know. But I guess that's where that eternal question comes back. Who is it that we send, and what belief systems do they carry with them? Are they purely science, or is it a hybrid?
Yeah.
Or have we reached a point where we can all stand as one race and call ourselves humans?
Exactly.
Who knows? But
exactly.
Fingers crossed, we can chat about these mysteries of the universe and the human spirit again in the near future. But all I can do is say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It's been amazing. And look, for any science fiction lover out there, jump onto that book, Sha'kert, End of Night. I suspect it is going to give you at least 6-12 months worth of thinking by the sounds of it, and a whole new way of looking at what it means to be, a human being on this planet. And we didn't even get the opportunity to talk about the Amish people in detail. So I really want to get you on the show again very soon, and we can chat about that a little bit further. But in the meantime,
I'd love to.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with all of the wonderful people that support our podcast. And I can only wish you all the very best for the year ahead.
Thank you for doing this, and from behalf of all Australian authors, the support that you give and the Australian Book Lovers website is amazing, and you're to be congratulated for that. It's a brilliant thing to do. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, let's see if we can get it even bigger and better moving forward, and to the point where we will be able to be the first podcast on Mars. That's the goal.
That sounds good. That sounds good.
All right, take care, Ish.
And yourself, Darren. You have a great one. Cheers, yeah. Bye.
So a far-reaching conversation you had with Ishmael, and thanks so much, Ish, for, being able to share all of that fantastic, I guess, the themes and the threads of conversation. You did go down some cosmic rabbit holes, but yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, such a pleasure to be able to chat with him, and the conversations just naturally went down to some really intriguing pathways, and definitely left me with many a theme to consider, especially, for example, I've just recently returned from a trip again out bush, so a lot of time behind the wheel on my own, and a bit of time out there on my own, and I had a lot of this conversation still fresh in my mind, and it was so I did have the chance to think about a lot of things, but still it is such an intriguing thought experiment, I suppose. If you have two, so we say different, let's just say two different morals, each feeling that they're best, and that was the sort of thought process that I ran with this, and it's made it really interesting thought. So I guess it really brings a spotlight to what it means to have a culture or an identity on a society level and on a personal level, and when you bring, it's okay if we all I guess exist side by side, and obviously part of our morals would be to accept the difference of others. I think that's very important. But what happens if you have to bring two together, for the sake of survival? That's the theme that I sort of had in my head. And it's a difficult theme, because as mentioned, as I think I chatted with Ish, the irony is that two morals that come together will, as we see sometimes in reality here on planet Earth, they'll have a moral of peace and love, but deep within that moral is the, I guess, the agreement to also defend the morals with violence and death.
Yeah,
And that
it's
is such a unique situation to be in.
Yeah, and I like the thought that Ish had about we won't in the future talk about culture, but because we'll all be the same culture, just interpreting it in different ways. And it kind of led to, you thinking about what are the things or what part of culture do we take if we leave the planet? If the Mars junket is happening very soon, and that's entirely inappropriate. It's not a junket, but you know what I mean. The Mars launch?
Well, the
mission.
Mars,
Thank you. I couldn't think of the M word. The Mars mission, what is it that we're going to take with us? And so I did a little bit of hunting around about, cultural globalization, I guess, as a first step to cosmic globalization. And there was a few different definitions, but I really quite like Wikipedia's, which was that cultural globalization refers to the transmission of ideas, meanings and values around the world in such a way as to extend and intensify social relations. And I thought, that's the one that I really like, is that it does extend and intensify social relations. And look, certainly you can take that in a positive or a negative light. But when you think about the cultural globalization that we have already experienced with the internet, imagine what that's going to be like when we extend it in a cosmic level. And, it makes me think of, the Expanse, for example. That's the one sort of closest to mind at the moment. And the fact that the setting or the world building where humanity has gone from Earth to Mars to the asteroid belt and then through the alien gates. Sorry, anybody, that's a spoiler in case you haven't read the series. But what they took with them was the good, the bad and the ugly of all of the cultures and the interplay of, peoples and power and social class, and all of those things were still on Earth when people left, and they kind of took those to Mars. Mars was a bit more militaristic in this series, and then kind of the resource where they mined all the resources for the expansion on the asteroid belt were those poorest people, and so the belters then became the underclass, I guess, of everything. And so that's not such a good reflection of cosmic globalization and maintaining that cultural identity. A lot of them did, but, then they had names for people on Mars, and while it was no longer your racial identity from your Earth descendancy, it was the planet you were born on, or the air that you breathe, whether it was a space station or a planet, whatever that might be. So what do you think are the most important elements of a culture that you'd like to see spread by humanity?
I think we're not going to achieve it on Earth. It's just, but we can, I think, in a roundabout way. So I'll take that back. But as far as what I think is important, science, I think, is important because that's a universal truth, and unity, I think, is important. And as you're chatting, I was thinking, you use the word humanity, and I think that is I cannot physically see the Earth saying, you know what, we're going to remove a lot of the cultures that we have here on Earth. We're going to identify as humans. We're no longer going to be bound by the soil that we're born on. That's never going to happen. But what we could do,
but not in our lifetime. You don't think there will be a point at which it doesn't matter so much?
It will take a long time because we're actually holding on to it tighter than ever now, I think, to the point where, you're seeing it overseas where if somebody even touches or wears a hat that may represent another culture, there's a big fight. And, what do they call it? Appropriating, misappropriating, which is, most times ridiculous. But I'm thinking, we've got this beautiful icy landscape, just down the road from here called Antarctica, and we could set up, a huge station, which obviously there is already a station there, but build up a base purely for people that are ready to go and never come back from Antarctica, and possibly get ready for space travel and whatnot. But they would not be Antarctica. They would be they would be the first just human species, as opposed to, French or German or Australian or whatever. They would represent humanity. And then we could start building a small group of people that could represent, that is humanity, that goes into space, that is bound by science, that don't bring belief systems that can be questioned so much. Instead, their focus is on remaining united, and their focus is on achieving, something truly special. I think if you bring religious aspects into it, or belief systems that have those morals where they will not back down, then it's a failure from the start again. So very tricky.
Look, it is tricky. And the other thing is that the theme or the concept of colonialisation, of colonialism, even, saying that we'll just be humans. And because, you talked about cultural appropriation, and I think that is something we really should be careful of, because as, coming from a mostly European descent and, just landing in Australia 200 years ago, I am from that culture that did appropriate the entire continent, let alone, now, appropriating various bits of the Australian Indigenous culture. However, they, many of them have come together in absolute generosity and said, let's learn. And, the Uluru Statement from the Heart is out there, and we hope that we can get a voice to Parliament and truth-telling and treaty. And I see now, and I'm certainly not going to say that I've finished learning about this, but the more I learn about that endemic or the kind of innate colonialised views I have of the world, then when I read even books about where humanity has gone into the ether, out into the cosmos, and they just wipe out alien races, or they rename all the plants, or they, do those things that the powerful party does to whoever they're taking over. And I think perhaps with not as much hope that, humanity is a little bit more doomed to do that same mistake, or to play that same mistake over and over again, because we're more powerful, or we think we're more intelligent or more technologically advanced, then therefore you're not worth it. And we see it also in dystopian or sci-fi alien invasions, where the aliens are more intelligent or technologically advanced, and they invade us, and then we react with horror and everything else, which is what many of the countries in the world who have been colonised by other cultures, it all becomes so, is there a right, is there a wrong, how do we make it work? I don't have the answer.
Oh, that's the beautiful thing about science fiction. You can follow so many different subgenres. I love science fiction, for example, that requires, maybe landing on these really unique and sometimes scary planets that has no life or has no, sentient beings. And so there's that having to, learn how to build a colony and start life on a planet. And that requires that unity. So for me, I like that. I like any sci-fi that at least in some part investigates that need, that unity requirement, because of course as soon as the importance of the unity lessens to a degree, then you see the breakdown, and that's usually can be obviously a driving plot force. So because then maybe two belief systems split, and one will take one particular choice of living and one might take another, and there you've got a story, these two different factions on the same planet, which one's going to discover the way to live properly. And that is, I think, our future. But on Earth, it's every time, the more we recognise culture, which we do because we think that's the right thing to do, the more we maintain division, which is such a difficult snake chasing its tail. And that, I think, is it's a paradox or it's enigma that by coming together we separate even further. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about science fiction, that's willing to explore those different themes of what keeps us together or what divides us, what will work, what won't. Personally, I think it'll all be just digital transmission anyway. I don't think the human body's going to survive that sort of space travel.
Discorporalized, or whatever will only become thought.
Well, yeah, absolutely, or at least digitally stored, because we've also got the technology to digitally store DNA, and then there'll be machines where we'll be able to basically rebuild human life on other planets if we find the right, looking in the future. That to me is fascinating, because then, is it an opportunity do we make that all peaceful species by manipulating DNA just slightly? And then is there the option to place digital consciousness back into a body as it's growing, at the right time? So there's lots of things to imagine.
Lots of.
But
okay.
Is it morally right to take out the ability to kill?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh.
If, because then does that make us weak against other things, or I don't know. No. So is it free will anymore? Is free will right to send into the universe, or will it end in disaster? So many thoughts bubbles from a discussion with such a wonderful gentleman, and I really do hope to have the opportunity to chat again with him today. Yeah. But it did inspire me to think of for today's quotes. How's that for a segue?
You got in before me, but go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple of quotes about, I guess, that concept of what's important in us as a human race, that I think is worthy to send out to space in a roundabout way. What was the motivation for your quotes for today?
Well, it was definitely still around the dystopian possibilities, I think, and also the thought of, how does culture fit together and where does it go? So, yes, it was all around that sort of maintaining the cultural identity and, the whole leaving the earth, what would we take with us kind of thing. So, yeah. Are you ready for the first one?
I'll take my Oculus, my PlayStation. No, it's okay. Absolutely. What is your first one?
So my first one is from Rick Yancey, and he is the author of, amongst other, I think he's got a dozen or more books out there, but one called The Fifth Wave. And I think actually I think I started to watch a little bit on the telly, but then got sidetracked. But anyway, Rick suggests, or in one of his books, in The Fifth Wave, some things you can never leave behind. They don't belong to the past. They belong to you. And I thought,
not belong to the past, but to me.
Yeah, so I thought, well, that's kind of, if you are taking your cultural identity, yourself, your whatever, with you wherever you go, well, you can't leave the past behind because it's yours.
No, that's right, unless we put little kids on Antarctica and teach them they're humans.
All right.
No, that's a really cool quote.
So that's pretty good. So, yeah, go ahead. What do you got?
Oh, okay. So, my first one is, of all people, it is from a gentleman by the name of Albert Einstein. And it reads as follows. It seems to me that the idea of a personal God is an anthropological concept which I cannot take seriously. I also cannot imagine some will or jail outside the human sphere. Science has been charged with undermining morality, but the charge is unjust. A man's ethical behaviour should be based effectually on sympathy, education, and social ties and needs. No religious basis is necessary. Man would indeed be in a poor way if he had to be restrained by fear of punishment and hope of reward after death. By Albert Einstein. So
there's a lot in that.
I was going to say a little bit to unravel. I don't think he's saying there's no God or anything like that. I think it's that we can't use, we should look for morals within ourselves first and foremost.
Yeah, it's almost as if technology of itself is not always neither good nor evil. In fact, it is, a tool in the hands of men and women.
Well, yeah, there's always, without getting into the whole God debate, but there is, one of the usual arguments is God gives us morals, but that's not true either, because how many people are killing for God. But the thing is, of course, the argument on the other side is, well, there are a lot of people that perhaps don't believe in God but still have morals, and so where is the seat of the morals for human beings? I think that's the quote. That's the thought direction that takes me. But yes, Mr. Albert Einstein, I suspect he sat there and pondered life quite deeply, considering he gives us time and relativity that can send me into thought loops of insanity.
All right, so here's one that's a little bit more hopeful. So this is from Marie Lu, who's an American author, Chinese-American young adult author, best known for a dystopian and militarised future. So I thought this might be good to hear from her. The quote is, "Each day means a new 24 hours. Each day means everything's possible again. You live in the moment, you die in the moment, you take it all one day at a time."
Oh, I like it.
Yeah, that's from her book Legend. So I figure, well, actually, you know what? Sometimes we can overthink things. So each 24 hours, the sun rises again, and let's just give it another shot. Live in the moment, die in the moment, take it all one day at a time. So, yeah, I thought that was quite a nice one.
Yeah, so I think it is something worth, to take a day of just being and maybe not worried about tomorrow just for one day. It's going to be, or worry about yesterday. I think that would be, it's a nice little sigh of relaxation from your spirit and soul and mind. So I might schedule my day of no tomorrow yesterday.
Or you could share your second quote with us.
Yes, certainly. So, and just like you, I wanted to bring it around to something a little bit more lighthearted, or at least a little bit more hopeful, shall we say. So this is by, now, I profess I have never read any Harry Potter.
That's okay.
So I'm told this quote comes from Eliza Yudowski, Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality.
Right.
So the quote is, "There is no justice in the laws of nature, no term for fairness in the equations of motion. The universe is neither evil nor good. It simply does not care. The stars don't care, or the sun, or the sky. But they don't have to. We care. There is light in the world, and it is us." So,
Nice,
I think,
nice.
Going back to what you said, like similar with technology, it's neither good nor evil. And I think the universe is, well, at least my reality here on planet Earth, I don't know if it's good or evil. It's definitely got some sting to it sometimes, that's for sure. I'm still thinking evil can also be spelled S-P-I-D-E-R, but that may change. Spider. I see no goodness in spiders.
I thought you said SE. I'm thinking, what is a cider? But no, it's a spider.
No,
Sorry,
SP.
mentioned it once, think I got away with it. All right, so Darren, that has been an amazing, really insight into the mind of Ish Soledad, and thank you, Ish, for giving us those threads to follow. We could chat forever, and I know we chat outside the actual recording, but tell me, who is on next week?
Yes, absolutely. So, as mentioned during the news segment, we have the fantastic author Andrew Roth joining us for a chat, all about his writing and the release of his new book, The Teeth of a Slow Machine. So, fantastic chat, and that will be episode 58 coming very soon. So, but in the meantime, also, I think, Veronica, today we have a special guest doing a book review.
Indeed, we have. So we've got Naomi Shippen. Now, Naomi is also a writer, and you can find a story in an anthology, Life in the Times of Corona, that is on the website. But Naomi has very kindly, she's a great reader, and she also has her own blog and does lots of reviews. So she was very kind enough to review a new book that we have that's been one of our spotlighted features of the week, which is Release by Lucy Christopher. So we've got Lucy booked in for a chat a little bit further down the track. But in the meantime, Naomi has done us a little audio review, which is brilliant. So if you fancy giving us some audio reviews of some of the books that you've read on the website, please feel free to record it, even if it's just on your phone. Introduce yourself, introduce the book, tell us what you thought, and send it along in, and we will put it on the website. And the authors are always pleased to have people who've taken the time to share what they think about the book. So that is great. Yeah.
And I think any Australian book, if you've read one and it's touched you in a way that you'd like to do a review, please send it in.
Yeah.
And don't feel that you don't need to summarise the effect it had on you or the beautiful things you discovered in the pages in 60 seconds. Your review might go for 15 minutes. It may be, it could be 1 minute, it could be 15. But if you've read a fantastic Australian book that's touched you in any way, scared the razoo out of you, or swept your heart away with romance or whatever it might be, would love to have you record a review and send it in. It'll be fantastic.
Indeed, it would.
And so stay tuned after our tag on for our first special guest review.
Yes, indeed. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about the books that we have on the website, jump on at australianbooklovers.com. If you'd like to get on the newsletter list and be in the running for some giveaways, then jump on to the page that says Book Lovers, submit your details there, and I will put you in the draw for the giveaways as they come. You can find us on social media, on Twitter at Australian Books, on Facebook and Instagram at Australian Book Lovers, and we are also on LinkedIn and YouTube. So drop us a comment there, like the podcast on whatever podcasting platform you happen to be, share it with your friends, tell them about how fabulous it is, and go out and buy an Australian book or borrow it from the library or get yourself an e-copy. Whatever you do, keep reading Australian books. And that's all there is from me. What about you, Darren?
I was going to say, or go steal a book, because I was thinking, and I say that in jest, but I remember Chopper Reed's books were the most stolen book. It was quite fitting.
No, do not. We are not advocating
do not steal a
theft
book.
at all. Do not steal a book,
No.
please. If you can't
No,
afford
but I
it,
thought that was
go
funny.
to the library where it's free, but where authors will still get a small royalty every time you check out a book. And I've got a book waiting for me down at the library, and I want to get there before it closes today because I don't want them to give it back or send it back to Bendigo. But anyway.
So anyway, you get your book, it will ignite your imagination, I'm
Indeed.
sure.
And so what about the tagline? What are we going to do now? Are we going to be in the hollows of space or what?
I thought we might be walking on a... We've just stepped off of a spaceship. We're walking on a very unknown planet. It's spooky. It's dark. We don't know where we are. There was a malfunction with the ship.
Oh, yes.
And I'm going like, the technology is pretty obvious technology. We've got helmets on, so with lights. So we're talking to each other through our helmets. So there's
okay.
The breathing and the So we're very calm,
Right.
but a little bit scared. So, yes, I think we'll see what we can do.
Okay. Are you there, Darren? Darren, are you there?
I'm here, Veronica.
Okay, I just wanted to say, take care for now and remember to
Read
more
Aussie.
books.
I wouldn't go that way, Veronica. I can see something moving. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for episode 37. Thank you to Ish for giving so much food for thought and bringing so many themes to be bubbling in my imagination. And thank you, everyone, for being a part of the Australian Book Lovers podcast and website. And I look forward to hopefully you joining us for episode 38. In the meantime,
38 or 58? How about we go 58? I think we've done 38.
Oh, no. There we go. In my mind, I'm still walking on that planet. I was just picturing what I'm thinking. Oh, that's cool. So, yes, I'll redo that. I really look forward to everyone joining us for episode 58. But in the meantime, take care.
Bye for now.
Hi, this is Naomi Shippen. I love writing in all its many forms, blogs, book reviews, and even novels. Women's fiction, suspense, and domestic noir hold a special fascination for me. This is my review of Release by Lucy Christopher. Living under an assumed name half a world away, former kidnap victim Kate Stone remains under the spell of her former captor and the life they shared in the desert of outback Western Australia. A decade later, Kate is outwardly very different from her 16-year-old self, trading her long dark hair for a short blonde style and cultivating a strong, hard body in contrast to the softness of her youth. Living a reclusive existence in her London flat, Kate works from home as a travel agent, eschewing the love and friendship of those around her to wallow in memories of her time with kidnapper Tyler McFarlane. Although she hates Ty for cutting her off from friends, family, and a normal teenage life, Kate remains in his thrall. Years of therapy, alcohol dependence, and risk-taking sexual behaviour barely take the edge off her feelings for Ty, and she creates a makeshift shrine to him where she regularly worships. But when Kate sees an opportunity for retribution, she dives ever deeper into her obsession, hoping that in gaining revenge, she will finally find release. Release is an enthralling story of two people entwined by the destructive forces that ensnare them. The novel explores the notions of justice and punishment and questions the efficacy of seeking revenge. If you enjoyed Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn and My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell, you're going to love Release by Lucy Christopher.
Let's meet again. Where magic happens.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.